My name's Tony Thacker. I'm the Vice President of Marketing here at SoCal Speed Shop.
And tell us a little bit about, you obviously have an accent.
Yeah.
So you weren't
You guys have the
born in
accent.
Southern California.
No, I was born in England and grew up there in the 50s when it was, cold, grey, miserable. We still had petrol or gasoline rationing, and there were ration books for petrol when I was a kid, and other things. So it was a real grey, miserable scene, and there was really no car scene. I mean, there was no cars in our street when I was 10. And my dad bought the first vehicle in our street. He bought an old Ford van, and that was the first car that anybody had in our street. And I had a paper route, and somebody on my route had Hot Rod magazine. This was probably late 50s, early 60s. And it was just amazing. And I would sit on the sidewalk reading Hot Rod magazine and not possibly believing that there could be cars that were red. I mean, there were no red cars. You didn't see them. There were grey cars, there were brown cars, and there were green cars. And that was about it. So it was almost, any color you like as long as it's black. So seeing red and yellow cars with big chrome engines and stacks and exhaust pipes was just unbelievable. And then one day I was in a toy shop, and there was a plastic model kit, a monogram model kit of a little Deuce Roadster with a devil's head on the front. And I still have pictures here of that car in my library. And I bought the model kit and took it home and made it, and just kind of got hooked. And then in the early 60s, there was an American drag team that came to Europe. Dean Moon and somebody else, Mickey Thompson. Alex's old partner, Mickey Thompson. They came to England in 1962, and I couldn't go then, but I went the following year. And my dad took me, and he just thought this was the stupidest thing that he had ever seen. But he took me and my school friends, and we watched drag racing in the rain, which is miserable, because you can't drag race in the rain because the cars don't go anywhere. But, they did it, and they put on an awesome show, and we were just all hooked, and that was it. So it took me a long time to get a job in the industry. I just never thought that there was any way to work in this industry and get paid for it. And finally, I got a job on a magazine, a sort of an English equivalent of Hot Rod magazine. It was called Hot Car, but it wrote about all sorts of goofy English cars that were, people were trying to make them look American. Because you have to remember, gas in England is $7 a gallon. So driving an American car that does 8 to the gallon really doesn't make any sense. And the roads are narrow, and the insurance is expensive, and parking spots are really, really small. So having a Trans Am, which I had for a while, is just goofy. But if you love it, you do it. So it's okay, And then I, got carried on working in the industry, and then met Pete. I was over here covering a hot rod show, and hanging out the back of a station wagon, a rental station wagon, shooting the California Kid, and got to know Pete, and we kept in touch and became friends. And then finally I decided to move here in 1988, and Pete was working at the trade association, SEMA at the time, and he got me a job there, and just haven't looked back since. So I keep following him like a little puppy dog. Wherever he goes, I go with him. So it's great. We have a good friendship. It's cool.
When did you first meet Alex?
Alex, I didn't meet until we started the SoCal Speed Shop. So that would have been in the middle of '97. Pete had a business called PC3G, which is even hard for me to get it all together. And he was looking for an identity for the company. And he'd restored the tank and made good friends with Alex, and was laying in bed one night and thought, boy, I wonder if we could resurrect the SoCal Speed Shop. And Alex, being a real canny old businessman, he'd kept the rights to the name, and he'd produced a commemorative catalog all those years. So when it came time for us to resurrect the SoCal Speed Shop, it was very, very easy. I mean, it wasn't difficult at all to do that. And it was just like turning on a faucet. I mean, we went to the California Hot Rod Reunion in November '97, and we sold more product in 2 days than PC3G had sold in 2 years. It just took off, and we haven't stopped since. It just keeps growing. We keep pushing it, and it keeps growing, which is great.
Well, what kind of cars have you been involved with here?
Here?
Are you building your own car now?
Yeah, I own this dusty black piece behind me, and it's I had a Deuce Roadster that I built in England, and I shipped it to America. I built it left-hand drive because we're right-hand drive in England, but I knew I'd always come here, so I built that car and brought it over here. But it was kind of a confused car. It was in that stage when people were moving into smooth, billety kind of hot rods. So there was lots of weird bits on it, and I really didn't like the car very much, so I sold it and don't miss it. And it took me quite a while to get another hot rod, and that's this piece of Blackness behind me, and I raced that with a guy that works here called Jimmy Shine. I'm the wallet and he's the wrench. No, the other way, what's it round? I'm the wallet and he's the wrench, that's it. So I pay for it and he fixes it, which is where we are right now because we had a little transmission problem last year. He was going up. We drove it to Bonneville, drove all the way to Bonneville, nearly 800 miles, and then he was going 192 backwards when the transmission went out of the car. So now we have to fix the trans and go back this year and try to go 200 miles an hour in it. We want to be the world's fastest street rod, which is only 205, so we don't have so far to go. It'll be fine.
Talk a little bit about your experience of working here at SoCal and working with the different personalities, but the different kinds of creative personalities that work here. It seems as if in talking to Alex and talking to Dick and talking to Pete, that this kind of endeavor here, especially it seems in the hot rod business, is very collaborative in the way you approach things. So in a sense, it's not surprising that you have a lot of musicians, a lot of artists who are attracted to the kind of work that you guys do.
Yeah.
And it seems that even within the group of hot rod enthusiasts, there's a lot of sharing of information and a lot of goodwill that goes on.
Yeah. That's, let me just think about it for a minute. Yeah, working here is probably, you know, the best opportunity anybody could have if you love cars and hot rods because, you know, Alex gave us the absolute best foundation. I mean, there was a SoCal t-shirt in 1947, and by 51, he had, you know, colored jackets, uniforms, embroidered outfits, t-shirts, team colors for the car, which people at Indy might have been doing, but hot rodders certainly weren't doing back in the 40s. So as a, you know, as a brand to build on, there's no equal for it. So it's absolutely wonderful. And we have this giant archive of still photography as well as Alex's film and all this stuff to work from, which is just absolutely great. And then that attracts other people that have other talents in other areas, like Ron, who does our website. I mean, I wouldn't say he's an absolute car guy, but at the same time, he does an awesome job of putting together a website that, you know, reflects all of that history. Alex, our clothing designer, he came here as a sweeper, and somebody said he can draw. So I talked to him, and we kind of didn't meet anywhere. So it took about 2 years for Alex and I to recognize that he had a talent to design clothing. And now I'd say, you know, he's great. I mean, he's absolutely wonderful. And then you have guys in the shop who can take chunks of metal and grind and whittle and file them away and get little jewels out of that stuff. And it's just absolutely wonderful to watch them work and create, you know, rolling masterpieces from giant lumps of steel and aluminum. And it's just, I don't know, I couldn't think of a better place to be right now. I complain about it all the time, every day. Right, Ron? But still the best place to possibly be to be doing this stuff. So for me, you know, growing up in that grey England, raining, I'm here and it's paradise. But it's Pomona.
Talk a little bit about your relationship with Jimmy Shine and the kind of
we don't have a relationship.
Designer or creator that Jimmy represents.
Jimmy and I,
right, sure. Alex, Pete.
Yeah. Jimmy and I joined the company about the same time. And I'm going to say it might have been even a year before we barely talked to each other, because I was in a little room doing marketing and PR, and he was outside creating a motorcycle at the time. And it took a long time for us to meet and kind of talk to each other, and then find eventually what an incredibly creative person Jimmy is in his own way. And particularly when he built his truck. He built a bare metal 34 pickup, which really turned the hot rod world upside down. There were a lot of kids building rat rods, or as they call them at the time, but they were really rough. And what Jimmy was doing was taking the sort of level of finish and creativity that Pete would put into a car and putting it into a rat rod. So it looks cartoonish, and it's really, really funky, and it's different, but the detail and the finish is just absolutely stunning. And again, that's a guy taking a piece of metal and grinding it and filing it, or taking a found piece of something, like an old aircraft seat or an old aircraft fuel tank, and massaging that and making it work in a automotive environment. And that's a whole different talent. And he's as creative as Pete and Alex in doing that, and probably as good as anybody. He still makes mistakes, but he makes really, really cool stuff out of bits of old junk, which is just great. That's what Alex was doing. Alex bought a belly tank and a Model T chassis and created a 200 miles an hour car out of it, and basically it was scrap. That the tank was $5, I think, something like that. So it's the same philosophy, and just being able to apply that creativity that somehow flows out of here all the way down here to these little fingers and makes you do things that other people can't do. Jimmy just finished a car, and it has, I think, 56 handmade rivets in the car. Well, making one would be a bit of a pain. Making two, I could make two. I couldn't make 56 rivets. Drive me nuts. But Jimmy can do that. He can stand there all day and file those little screws, and then painstakingly install them and painstakingly tighten them all down without cracking the paint. And that's just the patience to do that, the patience to make the individual face for every instrument, for every knob, for every gear shift lever. And just keep beating that stuff and working it and filing it until it's just perfect. Just incredible, incredible talent, but patience, which is what most people don't have to do something like that. It's really amazing. Just blows me away when you stand and watch those guys work.
Bruce Meyer said something interesting when we did an interview with him. He talked about the discipline that it takes in order to be a good, not just a good, but a great craftsman.
Oh, yeah.
The kind of discipline that Alex has and the kind of discipline that Pete has.
Yeah.
And he thought that Alex saw that in Pete, recognized the fact that he had the discipline to be a good business person, but to be a really great craftsman.
Yeah.
And is that sort of the key that you're talking about in terms of Jimmy's skill?
Yeah, I think so. Not to give up quickly, because I don't have the patience to do that, and I can give it so much, but not the hours it takes to keep grinding on the same thing. I think in Jimmy's truck he made the steering arms, which are these two big lumps of metal that make the wheels go. He has 40 hours in the steering arms because he took giant lumps of steel and ground and whittled and filed them all away just to make two steering arms. Well, you can go buy them, nearly, but 40 hours to make that, the tenacity to do that and end up making something that is just beautiful and looks like you didn't make it. That's the trick, is to make it look like it came from a factory that somewhere made these things, but they didn't actually. They actually handmade them all. He just made a blower drive for another roadster. It's an incredible piece of work that is just totally hand-formed. You think, God, how did you do that? How did you stick with that in all the time it took to make that thing work? I don't know, can't do that.
Why does he do that? Why does he take that?
Because he can. Well, because he gets paid. We are very, very lucky to have a group of customers who recognize that and can afford to pay for somebody to hand, craft a car for them. And that's another thing that makes SoCal such a really wonderful, lucky place to work, because you have a group of customers like Kirk White or JJ Barnhart. I think JJ has 5 cars in here right now that we're working on. And to have that kind of patronism is just awesome. It'd be like paying Michelangelo to paint the Sistine Chapel. Somebody's got the money to do that. Well, those customers have their money to afford to pay Jimmy to work on a car for as long as it takes to get it right, which is, just incredible. It's wonderful. What else?
What do you think is going on with the trend of the big 3 in Detroit, making these little forays out to specialty shops like SoCal, and doing collaborative projects like the Belly Tinker? What is it that Jam gets out of being here, and what do you guys get out of Jam being here?
We get paid. We get salary on Thursday. You got the handout. Detroit's part in this has been going on for a long time. They would contract hot rod builders in the 50s like George Barris or the Alexander brothers to build show cars. And so this has been going on forever. We just happen to be, kind of the flavor of the day right now. But hopefully what we would bring them is history and cool. You know, it's really hard to be in Detroit and apply cool that's going to relate to kids in California that they want to try and influence. So they would use a company like SoCal to inject that cool into some of their vehicles, which we did last year. We took a Saturn, which is basically a grocery getter type car, and made it into a 200-mile-an-hour rocket ship. Well, that's adding a huge amount of cool to a piece of car that's really just a commodity. And that's what they look to us for, and hopefully we would do a good job in that. And they would also learn something too, because you know, you could have, we had some designers in here, and seeing a car be hand-built, one of them said, I didn't realize how much it took to build a car. Well, here's a guy designing cars for a major manufacturer, and he didn't know what it took to build a car. Well, he ought to, because, you know, how can you design one unless you know what it's going to take to make it? So it's a good two-way educational process. We learned an awful lot from GM. They brought us technology and information and visions that we, you know, were unable to reach. We're just not in that position. We're basically blacksmiths here, beating cars out of big chunks of metal. And they're designing cars in computer and showing us how to make wheels and how to make tires and how to make, you know, canopies, although we ended up making the canopy for the belly tank in much the same way that Ed Roth made a canopy. You know, cut a big hole in a piece of wood, lay the plastic over it and heat it up, and then the canopy gradually falls down until you've got this boat shape. And that's exactly how the new one was made, more or less. But yeah, there's an awful lot to learn from each other, and I think the collaboration for the future is just great, because we're going to continue to do that. We're going to continue to build race cars for them, which will leverage our history for them, but teach us new ways of going racing. Right now we're working on some projects of designing race cars in computer, and parts of it will be done in Detroit, and then parts of it will be done here in the shop in California, and hopefully what they design in the computer we can actually build in a new, much faster, much more economic way than we ever did before, and still go fast, which is, you know, what SoCal is all about, really.
What do you think the influence is going to be of the Rat Rod group, or have they had an influence actually?
Yeah, the Rat Rod group has had, I think, you know, just the most wonderful influence on our hobby, sport, industry, whatever you want to call it, because it's expensive. You know, building a Deuce Roadster is expensive. It takes $40,000 worth of parts and a minimum of 1,000 hours to build a car. So that puts it immediately, unless the guy can do it all himself and scrounge all the bits from a wrecking yard, you're looking at $100,000 minimum for a car. Well, that's too expensive for most people. And the hobby had gone down the road of doing very sort of futuristic, smooth cars, which were even more expensive to build, because you need metal shaping talents, and you need all these talents that most people working in their garage at home don't have. And if that's your goal, if that's what the magazines say, this is the coolest thing, when you can't build it, you can't get there. So I think that's why there had to be a sort of reversion to more traditional hot rods, because people couldn't get to something futuristic. Not that the cars weren't cool, they were great, but you can't do it at home. And the Rat Rod thing took that another quantum leap to affordability and made it cool, because it comes back to the old adage, you can sell an old man a young man's car, but you can't sell a young man an old man's car. So because all these kids were building real cheap, funky hot rods, it became cool. So it became cool enough for older guys to say, oh, I can drive that. I don't have to build $1 million hot rod to have fun. I can have a $20,000 hot rod and have just as much fun. So it's great for the industry. I mean, it's done the industry no end of good. There's like 10 magazines aimed at that crowd of people. You know, there's clothing, there's accessories, there's their own events. I mean, it's a whole nother industry separate from our industry. So from that point of view, it's absolutely the best thing that could happen for our industry, because it makes it affordable again. You know, you can now go and build a car. I only have about $30,000 in my Bonneville car. So for a 200-mile-an-hour roadster, it's great, because I don't have a $20,000 paint job on it. We have a rattle can paint job. You know, it's just done with a Krylon spray bomb. You know, so it means you don't have to spend millions of dollars to enjoy the hobby. And so that means it's the best thing that could ever happen to the hobby, because it makes it accessible to a lot of people. And that's what we want.
How is SoCal going to, I want to say, how are you going to reach that market? or are you going to reach that market in the future? Is that part of SoCal's
Well,
future market or not?
boy, I don't know if I want to answer that. That's a difficult question because the credo of a young rat rod builder would be to beg, borrow, steal, scrounge the parts to build a car. So they're not necessarily going to be a customer right away because, to them, we're at the other end of the spectrum already. But at the same time, when you build one of those cars, you need to build it safe and you need to build it correctly. So hopefully we would be able to help them with engineering things. This is why we do this, and here's the right shop to make that work. And we've actually had lots of young guys who are trying to build these cars and drive to Bakersfield. It's only 100 miles away, but they find out that when they build a really crummy car, you can't get to Bakersfield because you have to go over the grapevine and it's too hard. So they come to Pete and say, what do I need to do? How do I make this suspension work? How do I stop it going like this? Well, you put a steering dampener on it. So hopefully you would sell them a steering dampener and you'd sell them part of what we have to make their cars safe, because nobody wants to die out there in a hot rod. That's no fun at all. So that's, and if they come on board, then, and if they stay with it for the rest of their lives and their kids stay with it for the rest of their lives, then it's just great. I took my daughter, she's 3.5. I took her out in Pete's hot rod a couple of weeks ago. No seat belts, no crash helmet, nothing. And at first she wouldn't get in the car. She was too scared. And finally I said, look, get in the car, you'll love it. So then I get her in the car, and then she doesn't want to get out. So now, where's the green hot rod, Daddy? When are you going to bring that hot rod home again? And she loves, my yucky car. She calls my race car. She calls it my yucky car. And that's great. So she would grow up, knowing about it, having an affinity to it, and thinking it's something attainable to her. One day maybe she'll go 200 miles an hour in it. I don't mind. I wouldn't mind at all. It'd be cool. Is that enough?
Yeah.
Great. Good. All right. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.